The letter trembled in Nora Adams' hand as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail toward Salida, Colorado, each jolt sending pain through her bruised ribs and reminding her of everything she was trying to escape. She pulled the collar of her worn travel dress higher to hide the purple marks on her neck, evidence of the Philadelphia nightmare she'd fled 3 days ago. The year was 1878, and at 22, Nora had made the most desperate decision of her life. Answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride had seemed her only escape after her uncle's brutal attacks had escalated following her parents' deaths. The advertisement had been simple. Rancher seeks bride, must be of good character, willing to work hard. Passage paid. Now, as the coach approached the small frontier town nestled against the backdrop of towering mountains, Nora's heart pounded with fear. What kind of man awaited her? Had she traded one nightmare for another? Salida coming up, the driver called, and Nora pressed her face to the window. The town was modest but busy, with wooden buildings lining a main street where horses and wagons moved with purpose. Mountains rose majestically in the distance, unlike anything she'd seen in Pennsylvania. She clutched her small bag, all she'd managed to take when she fled, and tried to steady her breathing. When the stagecoach lurched to a stop, Nora waited for the other passengers to disembark before gingerly making her way down, wincing as her feet hit the ground and sent pain shooting up her bruised leg. The thin envelope containing her correspondence with Ethan Evans felt weightless in her pocket compared to the heaviness in her chest. A tall figure stepped forward from the small crowd waiting at the station. He removed his hat, revealing sun-lightened brown hair and a face tanned by outdoor work. He wasn't as old as she'd feared, perhaps early 30s, with clear eyes that studied her carefully. "Miss Adams?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "Mr. Evans," she responded, unable to mask the tremor in her voice. He stepped closer, then stopped abruptly when she flinched away. His eyes narrowed slightly as they took in her swollen cheek and the way she favored her right leg. "You're hurt," he said flatly, not a question but an observation. Nora felt tears threatening. She tried so hard to hide her condition, waiting extra days before traveling to allow the worst of the facial bruising to fade. "I had an accident before leaving Philadelphia." Ethan Evans said nothing for a long moment, just studied her with an intensity that made Nora want to shrink into herself. Then his expression softened. "Miss Adams, Nora," he said quietly, stepping back to give her space. "You're safe here. Forever. No one will hurt you on my watch." The unexpected kindness in his words nearly broke her composure. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You might change your mind." "I know enough," he replied. "You've traveled a long way based on nothing but letters and hope. That takes courage." He gestured to his wagon parked nearby. "My ranch is about 5 miles out of town. We should get you there so you can rest, but first," he hesitated, "I need to ask something important." Nora tensed, waiting. "Our arrangement," he said carefully. "You need time to heal both ways, I suspect. I won't rush you into any decisions about our marriage. You can have your own room and we can take time to know each other properly." Relief washed over her like cool water. "Thank you," she managed to say. As he helped her into his wagon, keeping a respectful distance, Nora noticed the neat bundles of supplies he'd evidently purchased in town. He climbed up beside her and clicked his tongue at the horses. "My ranch isn't grand," he said as they pulled away from Salida, "but it's growing. I've got good water, decent grazing land, and I'm building up my herd. The house has 4 rooms, kitchen, parlor, and 2 bedrooms. Nora nodded, taking in the landscape as they traveled. The vastness of the Colorado territory stretched before them, mountains rising majestically in the distance. It was beautiful but intimidating in its wildness. "Have you been in Colorado long?" she asked, trying to mask her discomfort as the wagon jostled her injuries. 7 years, Ethan replied. "Came out after the war with not much more than my horse and my brother's old rifle. Started as a hand at the Thompson place, saved every penny, then staked my claim when I could." "You fought in the war?" she asked cautiously. "Union cavalry," he answered with a nod. "Doesn't much matter out here, though. Men who survive just want to build something and leave the fighting behind." They fell into silence as the wagon rolled onward. Nora tried to sit straight despite her ribs protesting, determined not to appear weak. Her uncle had always said her weakness invited his cruelty. She pushed the thought away. "There it is," Ethan said eventually, pointing ahead to where a modest but well-maintained house stood in a small valley. A barn and corral sat nearby, with cattle grazing on the surrounding hillsides. Evans' ranch. As they drew closer, Nora saw the care that had gone into the place. The house was painted white with green trim, a small garden plot fenced nearby. Flowers grew beneath the front windows, adding cheerful color to the practical homestead. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Ethan's expression brightened slightly. "Been working on making the house proper for a while now. Added the second bedroom last winter." He guided the horses to a stop near the porch. "Let me help you down." When she stood, her legs nearly buckled from the long journey and her injuries. Ethan quickly moved to support her, but stopped himself from touching her without permission. "May I?" he asked, hands hovering near her elbow. The simple request for consent, something no man had offered her before, made Nora's throat tighten. She nodded, and he carefully helped her to the porch steps. Inside, the house was modest but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with simple but well-crafted furniture arranged comfortably. Braided rugs softened the wooden floors and curtains hung at the windows. "Your bedroom's this way," he said, leading her to a small but pleasant room with a freshly made bed, a chest of drawers, and a rocking chair near the window. "Bathroom's out back, I'm afraid, but I keep a pitcher and basin in here." He pointed to where they sat on a small table. "I'll bring your bag and give you time to settle. You must be hungry after traveling." Left alone, Nora sank gratefully onto the bed, allowing herself to feel the full extent of her exhaustion. The room was simple, but represented more personal space than she'd had since her parents died. The locked door she'd checked immediately was an unexpected luxury. Through the window, she watched Ethan unloading the wagon, his movements efficient and purposeful. He was different from what she'd imagined younger, certainly, and there was a quietness to him she hadn't expected. Later, after washing her face and hands and changing into a fresh collar, Nora made her way to the kitchen where Ethan was setting out a simple meal. "Nothing fancy," he apologized. "Just some stew I made yesterday, bread from town." "It looks wonderful," she assured him, carefully taking a seat. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. When they finished, Ethan cleared the dishes and refused her offer to help. "You need rest," he said firmly. "Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out routines." That night, in the unfamiliar bed, Nora lay awake for hours. The sounds were different here, no city noises, just the occasional lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind, and once, the distant howl of a coyote. She wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake or if, perhaps, she'd found an unexpected sanctuary. In the days that followed, Nora began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. Ethan rose before dawn, tending to the animals and working the land until dusk. She took over the household duties, cooking meals and keeping the house in order. Her injuries gradually improved, allowing her to move more freely, though the psychological wounds remained raw. Ethan kept his word about giving her space. He was unfailingly polite, never pressing for more than she offered in conversation, never entering her room, and always announcing his presence before entering the house from outside. One morning, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Nora was kneading bread dough when Ethan came in for his midday meal. "Smells good in here," he commented, washing his hands at the basin. "I found your mother's recipe book," Nora explained, gesturing to the worn notebook on the table. "I hope you don't mind." "Not at all." He smiled, a rare sight that transformed his usually serious face. "She was a fine cook, taught me enough to survive, but I've been eating my own cooking too long." Nora served the simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. As they ate, she gathered her courage to ask something that had been bothering her. "Mr. Evans, Ethan, please," he interrupted gently. "Ethan," she amended, "you've been very kind, but I'm concerned about our arrangement. You paid for my passage, and I'm aware of the expectations in such situations." He set down his coffee cup slowly. "The only expectation I have is that we're honest with each other, Nora. I meant what I said. You're safe here. But the marriage will happen if and when you're ready," he said firmly. "I'm not looking to own a wife. I want a partner, someone who chooses to be here." Nora studied him, trying to detect deception, but found only sincerity. "What about the town?" she asked. "Won't they talk if we're living here unmarried?" "Let them," Ethan shrugged. "I don't much care for gossip. But if it bothers you, we can tell folks we're married. The preacher only comes through every few months anyway." The casual way he addressed her concerns, respecting her feelings without judgment, was still unfamiliar but increasingly reassuring. That afternoon, Nora ventured outside to the small garden, where neglected vegetables struggled among encroaching weeds. Working in the fresh air, pulling weeds and carefully tending the plants, she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for too long. From the corral, where he was training a young horse, Ethan watched her. He didn't intrude, but his presence felt protective rather than threatening. As weeks passed, they established a comfortable routine. Nora found satisfaction in bringing order to the house and garden. She discovered that Ethan, for all his capability, had been living with the bare minimum of comforts. Simple touches, freshly laundered curtains, wildflowers on the table, meals served on actual plates instead of directly from the cooking pot, transformed the house into something closer to a home. One evening, as summer began its transition to fall, they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant orange and pink. "I need to ride out to the north pasture tomorrow," Ethan said. "I'll be gone most of the day." Nora nodded. It wasn't unusual for him to spend full days working far from the house. "Is there anything you need from town?" he asked. "I could stop there on my way back." "Some thread, if you wouldn't mind," she replied. "I've been mending your shirts, but they need more than patches at this point." Ethan looked embarrassed. "You don't have to do that." "I don't mind," she assured him. "It's satisfying to fix things." He studied her for a moment. "You've done a lot of fixing around here. The place hasn't looked this good since my mother was alive." The compliment warmed her. "It feels good to be useful." "You're more than useful, Nora," he said quietly. "You've brought life back to this place." The next day, alone in the house, Nora found herself humming as she worked something she hadn't done since before her parents died. The realization stopped her mid-motion. Somehow, without noticing, she had begun to feel safe. When Ethan returned that evening, he carried not only the requested thread but also a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Nora asked as he handed it to her. "Just something I saw in the mercantile," he said, suddenly looking unsure of himself. "You don't have to like it." Inside the package was a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Nora ran her fingers over the cover in wonder. "I noticed you reading that old almanac over and over," Ethan explained. "Figured you might like something new." "It's perfect," she whispered, fighting tears. The thoughtful gift touched her more deeply than he could know. In her uncle's house, books had been forbidden to her as filling a woman's head with useless notions. That night, she read by lamplight until her eyes grew heavy, savoring both the words and the freedom to enjoy them. The next morning, Nora was gathering eggs from the chicken coop when she heard unfamiliar voices. Looking up, she saw two riders approaching men she didn't recognize. Instinctively, she shrank back against the coop, her heart racing. Ethan emerged from the barn and walked to meet them. The conversation appeared civil but tense. After a few minutes, the men tipped their hats and rode away. "Who were they?" Nora asked when Ethan returned to the yard. "Wade Simmons and his foreman," Ethan replied, his expression troubled. "Owns the big spread east of here. Wants to buy my water rights." "And you don't want to sell." "Can't run cattle without water," Ethan said simply. "He's got plenty of his own, just being greedy." He seemed unhappy. Men like Simmons aren't used to hearing no. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't worry about it, he's all bluster." But that evening, Ethan checked the locks on the doors and windows more carefully than usual, and Nora noticed he kept his rifle closer at hand. 2 days later, they made their first trip into Salida together. Nora was nervous about meeting the townspeople, but Ethan assured her they were mostly good folks. "Mrs. Holloway at the general store might talk your ear off," he warned with a hint of amusement, "but she means well." Salida was busier than when Nora had first arrived, with horses tied to hitching posts along the main street and people moving purposefully between buildings. Ethan helped her down from the wagon and offered his arm the first time he'd done so. After a moment's hesitation, Nora placed her hand on his forearm, feeling the solid strength beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeve. His steadiness was reassuring as they navigated the busy street. As predicted, Mrs. Holloway greeted them enthusiastically when they entered the mercantile. "Ethan Evans, you finally brought your bride to town," the plump, gray-haired woman exclaimed. "We were beginning to think you were hiding her away." Nora tensed, but Ethan's calm reply put her at ease. "Miss Adams needed time to settle in," he said simply. "Nora, this is Mrs. Holloway." "Pleased to meet you," Nora murmured. Mrs. Holloway's keen eyes missed nothing, taking in Nora's simple dress and the fading yellow marks of bruising at her temple. To her credit, she asked no questions, merely squeezed Nora's hand warmly. "You come see me anytime you need a good chat," the shopkeeper offered. "Town women have to stick together out here." As they gathered supplies, Ethan introduced Nora to several other townspeople. Most were welcoming, though she noticed curious glances and whispered comments following them. When a stout man with an impressive mustache approached, Ethan's posture stiffened slightly. "Sheriff Douglas," Ethan greeted him. "This is Miss Adams." "Madam," the sheriff nodded politely. "Welcome to Salida." He turned back to Ethan. "Had any more trouble with your fence lines?" "Not since last month," Ethan replied. "Why?" "Thompson reported some cut wires yesterday," the sheriff said. "Thought you should know, being neighbors and all." "Appreciate it," Ethan said. "We'll keep an eye out." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Nora noticed a well-dressed man watching them from outside the bank. When their eyes met, he tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy that made her skin crawl. "Who is that?" she asked quietly. Ethan followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Wade Simmons. Best to avoid him." The man's cold smile lingered in Nora's mind during the ride home. Something about him reminded her uncomfortably of her uncle, a sense of entitlement that anticipated obedience. That night, unable to sleep, Nora heard Ethan pacing the main room. When she emerged in her dressing gown, she found him standing at the window, rifle in hand. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He turned, looking apologetic. "Thought I heard something, probably just a coyote." "You're worried about Mr. Simmons." Ethan sighed, setting the rifle aside. "Men like him play by different rules. Money gives them power, and power makes them dangerous." "I understand that kind of man better than you might think," Nora said quietly. Ethan studied her for a long moment. "Your accident before you left Philadelphia," he said carefully. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" The question hung in the air between them. Nora had never spoken openly about her uncle's abuse, had been trained to hide it, to be ashamed of it. But something about Ethan's steady gaze gave her courage. "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "It wasn't." Ethan didn't press for details, but his eyes darkened with anger, not at her, she realized, but for her. "Whoever hurt you," he said, his voice low and firm, "they can't reach you here." In that moment, standing in the dim light of the oil lamp, Nora felt something shift between them, a deepening of trust, perhaps, or the first tendrils of something more. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Nora was hanging laundry when a woman rode up on a pinto horse. She was perhaps 50, with silver threading her dark hair, dressed practically in a split riding skirt and plain blouse. "You must be Ethan's bride," the woman called as she dismounted. "I'm Martha Thompson, from the next ranch over." "Nora Adams," she replied, surprised at the neighborly call. "Brought you some preserves," Martha said, lifting a basket from her saddlebag. "And thought you might like some female company. Men are fine creatures, but they don't make for much conversation about certain things." There was something immediately likable about Martha's forthright manner. She accepted Nora's invitation inside with a grateful nod. "Been meaning to call sooner," Martha explained as they settled at the kitchen table. "But summer's busy, and Frank's leg is giving him trouble again. That's my husband." Over coffee and fresh bread, Martha shared news and practical advice about ranch life that Ethan, for all his consideration, hadn't thought to mention. She spoke of winters harsh enough to freeze cattle in the fields, of springtime floods and summer droughts, but also of wildflower meadows and aspen groves turned gold in autumn. "It's not an easy life," Martha admitted, "but it's a good one if you're with the right person." She studied Nora thoughtfully. "Ethan's a good man, quieter than most but solid." "He's been very kind," Nora agreed. Martha's expression softened. "Kind is a start. The rest comes with time." When Ethan returned from checking his cattle, he seemed pleased to find Martha there. The easy way they conversed told Nora they had a history of mutual respect. "Frank still having trouble with his fences?" Ethan asked as Martha prepared to leave. Her expression darkened. "Third time this month. Sheriff's useless, too afraid of Simmons to investigate properly." "You think Simmons is behind it? Who else wants both our lands?" Martha retorted. "He's been trying to buy out everyone between his ranch and the river." After Martha left, promising to return soon, Ethan seemed preoccupied. That evening, he cleaned his rifle and checked the ammunition with methodical care that spoke of military training. "Are you expecting trouble?" Nora asked. "Just being cautious," he replied. "Simmons doesn't take rejection well, and I've rejected his offers twice now." "What does he want with your land specifically?" Ethan grimaced. "The creek that runs through our property is the most reliable water source in the area. It stays flowing even in drought years. Whoever controls that water controls ranching for 50 miles. And he already has water rights elsewhere." "Yes, but he wants it all." Ethan set the rifle aside. Men like Simmons are never satisfied with enough. That night, a sound jolted Nora from sleep, the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. She rushed to her window in time to see flames leaping from the far side of the barn. "Ethan," she called, hurrying to the main room where he was already pulling on his boots. "Stay inside," he ordered, grabbing his rifle. "Bolt the door behind me." Through the window, Nora watched as Ethan ran to the barn. The fire had caught quickly in the dry hay, orange flames illuminating the night. In the distance, she could see riders moving away, 3 or 4 figures silhouetted against the darkness. Unable to remain idle, Nora filled buckets with water and rushed outside. Together, they fought the blaze, Ethan breaking down a burning section of wall while Nora passed him water. The horses whinnied in panic from the corral where Ethan had managed to move them. It was nearly dawn when they finally extinguished the last embers. Soot-covered and exhausted, they surveyed the damage. One corner of the barn was destroyed, but the structure remained standing. "Could have been worse," Ethan said grimly. "They wanted to scare us, not destroy everything." "Simmons?" Nora asked, though she already knew the answer. Ethan nodded. "Can't prove it, but yes." "What will we do?" He looked at her, surprise flickering across his face at her use of we. After a moment, his expression softened. "We'll rebuild what's damaged and be more vigilant," he said. "I won't be bullied off my land." The determination in his voice both reassured and worried Nora. She understood all too well how powerful men used intimidation to get what they wanted, and what happened to those who stood in their way. Later that day, Sheriff Douglas rode out to investigate, but his cursory examination and half-hearted promises to look into the matter confirmed Nora's suspicions that he was either afraid of Simmons or in his pocket. "Probably just drifters," the sheriff suggested, avoiding Ethan's direct gaze. "We've had some troublemakers passing through. Drifters who just happened to target the exact corner of my barn furthest from the house," Ethan challenged. "And coincidentally, right after I refused Simmons' latest offer," the sheriff shuffled uncomfortably. "Can't go making accusations without proof, Evans. Could make things worse." After he left, Ethan slammed his hand against the porch post in frustration. "He won't help," Nora said quietly. "No," Ethan agreed, his voice tight. "We're on our own." That night, exhausted from fighting the fire and cleaning up afterward, Nora was washing for bed when she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her basin. The woman looking back at her was different from the terrified girl who had arrived in Colorado, still cautious, still carrying scars both visible and hidden, but stronger somehow, more determined. A sound from the main room drew her attention. She found Ethan sitting at the table, head in his hands, looking more defeated than she'd ever seen him. "Ethan," she said softly. He looked up, quickly trying to compose his expression. "I'm sorry about all this, Nora. This isn't what you signed up for." "I signed up to leave a bad situation," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "Not for a perfect one." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "I promised you'd be safe here." "And I feel safer with you than I have in years," she said honestly. Something in her words seemed to steady him. He reached across the table, palm up, an offer, not a demand. After a moment's hesitation, Nora placed her hand in his. His fingers were calloused from work but gentle as they closed around hers. "We'll get through this," he said quietly. In that moment, with their hands joined across the weathered table, Nora realized that her feelings for Ethan had grown beyond gratitude or even friendship. The recognition was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning brought Martha Thompson again, this time with her husband Frank, a gruff older man with a pronounced limp, a war wound, Nora learned. They came to help rebuild the damaged section of the barn. "Neighbors stick together," Frank declared gruffly when Ethan protested. "Especially against snakes like Simmons." As the men worked on the barn, Martha and Nora prepared a hearty meal. The older woman seemed to sense Nora's changing feelings toward Ethan. "Takes courage to open your heart after it's been hurt." Martha said quietly as they worked. But a closed heart never heals properly. Nora paused in her kneading. How did you know? Martha smiled gently. I recognize the signs. My father was a hard man, too free with his fists. When I met Frank, I was afraid to trust him. What changed? Time, Martha answered simply. And Frank's patience. He gave me space to find my own way to him. The words echoed in Nora's mind that evening as she watched Ethan thank the Thompsons for their help. There was a quiet dignity to him that she had come to admire, a strength that didn't need to dominate others. In the days that followed, they worked side by side to strengthen their defenses, repairing fences, setting up warning systems with bells on wires around the property perimeter, taking turns keeping watch at night. The shared purpose brought them closer, breaking down the careful distance they had maintained. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan broached a subject they had carefully avoided. There's something I need to ask you, Nora. She turned to him, curious at his serious tone. Our arrangement, he began carefully. It was meant to lead to marriage, but circumstances have changed. If you want to leave, go to Denver or back east, I'd understand. I'd make sure you had money to start fresh. The offer caught her off guard. Do you want me to leave? No, he answered immediately, the word emphatic and sincere. But I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you feel trapped by our agreement. Nora studied his face in the fading light. I don't want to leave, Ethan, she said softly. This place being here with you, it feels like home. Something shifted in his expression, relief perhaps, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. I care for you, Nora, he said, his voice low. More than I expected to. The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. In Philadelphia, men had spoken to her with elaborate compliments that masked darker intentions. Ethan's simple declaration held more truth than all those empty words combined. I care for you too, she whispered. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw, he leaned toward her. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When they parted, Nora saw in Ethan's eyes the same wonder she felt. That night, they spoke for hours, sharing pieces of their pasts they had kept hidden. Ethan told her of the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued him. Nora, in halting words, revealed the extent of her uncle's abuse after her parents' deaths from influenza, the isolation, the beatings, the constant fear. How did you escape? Ethan asked gently. He was drunk, Nora explained, her voice distant with memory. Worse than usual. When he passed out, I took what little money I could find, some clothes, and ran. I'd seen the advertisement for a mail-order bride in a newspaper he'd left out and wrote to you that same night from a boarding house. Ethan's hands clenched. If I ever meet this uncle of yours, you won't, she assured him. I'm never going back. Their newfound closeness didn't erase the threat from Simmons. 2 nights later, they were awakened by the sounds of cattle bellowing in panic. Ethan rushed out with his rifle to find several of his steers dead, shot, and others scattered into the hills. This has gone beyond warnings, he said grimly when he returned to the house. Simmons is trying to break us. Nora's fear was tempered by anger. What can we do? I need to ride to town tomorrow, Ethan decided. Talk to the sheriff again, though it probably won't help. And send telegrams to some of the other small ranchers. Simmons has been pressuring all of us. Maybe together we can stand against him. I'll come with you, Nora said firmly. Ethan looked like he might argue, but then nodded. 2 sets of eyes are better than one. The next morning they rode into Salida together. The town seemed different, somehow tenser, with people watching them more openly as they passed. At the sheriff's office, they found Douglas even less helpful than before. Unless you saw who shot your cattle, there's nothing I can do, he insisted, refusing to meet their eyes. Could have been wolves for all we know. Wolves that use rifles, Ethan challenged. Sheriff, Simmons is trying to drive me off my land. The Thompson place has had similar trouble. How many ranchers need to be targeted before you'll act? The sheriff's expression hardened. Be careful making accusations, Evans. Simmons is an important man in this territory. As they left the office, Nora noticed Simmons himself standing across the street, watching them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Two men flanked him, hard-faced cowboys with guns prominently displayed. "Ethan," she murmured, nodding subtly in their direction. Ethan placed himself between Nora and Simmons as the wealthy rancher approached. "Evans," Simmons greeted him with false cordiality. "And the lovely Mrs. Evans, I presume?" His eyes lingered on Nora in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss Adams," Ethan corrected stiffly. "What do you want, Simmons?" "Just being neighborly," the man replied, smiling coldly. "Heard you had some trouble with your cattle. Shame about that." "Isn't it?" Ethan replied, his voice leveled despite the obvious threat. "Strange coincidence." "Life's full of them," Simmons agreed. "My offer still stands, by the way, though the price has gone down considering recent damages." "Not interested," Ethan stated firmly. "Not now, not ever." Something dangerous flashed in Simmons' eyes. "Everyone has a breaking point, Evans, even you." His gaze shifted to Nora. "Even your lovely companion." Ethan stepped forward, his hands clenching into fists. "Stay away from her and stay off my land." "Public street," Simmons replied, spreading his hands innocently. "Free country." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day to you both." As he walked away, one of his men deliberately bumped against Ethan's shoulder. Ethan let it pass, though Nora could see the effort it cost him. At the telegraph office, Ethan sent messages to 4 neighboring ranchers, suggesting they meet to discuss their common problem. The operator promised to deliver them promptly. They were heading back to their wagon when Martha Thompson hurried toward them from the general store. "Thank goodness you're in town," she said breathlessly. "Frank sent me to find you. The ranchers are gathering tonight at our place secret-like." "Simmons has ears everywhere." "We'll be there," Ethan assured her. As they rode home, they remained vigilant, both sensing they were being watched. Sure enough, about halfway back to the ranch, Nora spotted movement in the trees. "Riders following us," she said quietly. "3, I think." Ethan nodded, having already noticed. "They'll likely just track us home. Simmons wants to know our movements." That evening, after securing the house as best they could, they rode to the Thompson ranch under cover of darkness. 4 other ranchers had gathered in the main room, all men with small to medium-sized operations like Ethan's, all targeted by Simmons in recent months. "He's trying to control all the water rights in the county," explained Jim Barton, a weathered rancher in his 50s. "My place backs up to the river. Had my irrigation ditches filled in twice this summer." "Cut fences for me," added Henry Wilson, the youngest of the group. "Lost 20 head before I could round them up." Each man had a similar story, and none had received any help from Sheriff Douglas. "We need to stand together," Frank Thompson declared. "Simmons has men and money, but he can't fight all of us if we're united." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Sam Lucas, an older rancher who had been silent until now. "We form a protective association," Frank explained. "Take turns patrolling each other's lands. Make it clear to Simmons that an attack on one is an attack on all." The discussion continued late into the night, with plans being made and duties assigned. Nora, the only woman present besides Martha, found herself included in the conversation, her observations and suggestions given the same consideration as the men's. As they rode home under a canopy of stars, Nora felt a mixture of fear and determination. "You think it will work?" she asked. "It's our best chance," Ethan replied. Simmons is used to picking us off one by one. Together, we're stronger." The plan went into effect immediately. Each ranch would be patrolled by 2 men every night, rotating responsibilities among the association members. During the day, they would work their own lands but remain alert for trouble. For 3 days, the system seemed to work. No further incidents occurred, and Nora began to hope that Simmons had recognized their unity and backed down. Then, on the 4th night, shots rang out from the direction of the creek. Ethan and Sam Lucas, who was staying with them for his patrol shift, rushed toward the sound. Nora, against Ethan's instructions, followed at a distance with a shotgun Martha had taught her to use. Near the creek, they found 2 of Simmons' men attempting to build a dam that would divert the water away from Ethan's land. A brief but intense exchange of gunfire ensued, with Ethan and Sam taking cover behind rocks while the intruders fired from behind the half-built dam. In the chaos, Nora circled around through the trees, approaching from an angle the men weren't watching. When one of them moved to get a better shot at Ethan, she fired a warning shot into the air. "Next one won't be a warning," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The unexpected threat from behind them confused Simmons' men long enough for Ethan and Sam to advance. Outflanked, the intruders fled into the darkness. "That was too close," Ethan said when they regrouped, looking at Nora with a mixture of admiration and concern. "And I told you to stay at the house." "Good thing she didn't," Sam observed dryly. "That flanking move might have saved our hides." Examining the abandoned dam in the morning light revealed how serious the threat had been. If completed, it would have diverted most of the creek away from Ethan's land, effectively rendering his ranch useless for cattle. The incident proved that Simmons was escalating his tactics. 2 days later, Henry Wilson's barn burned to the ground. The day after that, Jim Barton found 2 of his horses shot dead in their corral. The association members gathered again, this time at Ethan's ranch, to reconsider their strategy. "We need to take the fight to Simmons," Frank argued. "Show him we won't be intimidated." "And get ourselves killed or arrested," countered Sam. "That's exactly what he wants." "What about going above Sheriff Douglas?" Nora suggested. "Surely there must be territorial authorities who would investigate." "The territorial governor is Simmons' cousin by marriage," Jim explained wearily. "And the circuit judge won't be through for months." The discussion continued in circles until Martha, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "What Simmons wants is the appearance of legitimacy," she said thoughtfully. "He doesn't want to be seen as a bully driving smaller ranchers out. That would damage his standing with the banks and the territorial government." "What are you suggesting?" Ethan asked. "We make his tactics public," Martha explained. "Send telegrams to newspapers in Denver and even back east. Make noise that can't be ignored." The idea had merit. Simmons, for all his power locally, couldn't afford a scandal that might attract outside attention to his methods. "It's worth trying," Ethan agreed, "along with continuing our patrols." The next day, Ethan and Nora rode to Salida again to send telegrams to newspapers in Denver, Santa Fe, and even Chicago, where Ethan had a contact from his Army days who now worked as a reporter. They carefully documented the pattern of intimidation affecting multiple ranchers, presenting it as an issue of frontier justice, or the lack thereof. As they left the telegraph office, Nora noticed one of Simmons' men watching them from outside the saloon. His presence was no longer subtle. Simmons wanted them to know they were being observed. "He'll know what we've done soon enough," Ethan said grimly as they mounted their horses. "Good," Nora replied with newfound boldness. "Let him worry for a change." They were halfway home when 3 riders appeared on the trail ahead, blocking their path. Ethan immediately recognized Simmons in the center, flanked by two armed men. "That's far enough," Ethan called, halting their horses at a safe distance. Simmons smiled coldly. "Just wanting a friendly chat, Evans. You've been busy in town today." "Our business isn't yours," Ethan replied evenly. "Everything in this territory is my business," Simmons countered. His gaze shifted to Nora. "You know, Miss Adams, your companion here is being quite stubborn. Perhaps you might persuade him to be reasonable." "Mr. Evans makes his own decisions," Nora replied, meeting the man's eyes without flinching. "As do I, and we've decided not to be intimidated." Simmons' expression hardened. Brave words from a mail-order bride. "Yes, I know who you are, where you came from. Running from something in Philadelphia, weren't you? People who run once often run again when things get difficult." The knowledge that Simmons had investigated her background sent a chill through Nora, but she refused to show fear. "I'm not running anymore," she said firmly. "We'll see," Simmons replied. "Those telegrams you sent, unfortunate if they never arrived at their destinations." "Copies were sent from other towns," Ethan bluffed. "And letters by post. The story will get out, Simmons, one way or another." Whether Ethan's bluff worked or Simmons had other considerations, the wealthy rancher merely smiled thinly. "We'll see who lasts longer, Evans. My resources against your stubbornness." He gestured to his men, and they moved their horses aside. "Good day to you both." As Ethan and Nora rode past, Nora could feel Simmons watching them, his gaze like a physical weight on her back. That night, sitting before the fire, the confrontation with Simmons still fresh in their minds, Ethan turned to Nora with a serious expression. "He wasn't bluffing about knowing your background," he said quietly. "Which means he has connections back east. It might not be safe for you here anymore." "I'm not leaving," Nora said firmly. "Not unless you're coming with me." Ethan reached for her hand. "I've been thinking about that. Maybe we should both go sell the ranch, start fresh somewhere else." The suggestion stunned her. "This is your home. You built it from nothing." "It's just land and buildings," he replied. "Not worth your safety." The fact that he would consider abandoning everything he'd worked for to protect her moved Nora deeply. She leaned forward and kissed him softly. "This is our home now," she said when they parted. "I won't let Simmons take it from us. We stand together." The determination in her voice matched the strength he'd always seen in her, even when she'd first arrived bruised and frightened. Ethan smiled slightly. "Together, then," he agreed. "But I want to make it official." He hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. "That is, if you're willing. I know our arrangement started as convenience, but my feelings have become much more." Nora's heart raced. "Are you asking me to marry you, Ethan Evans?" "I am," he confirmed. "Not because of our original agreement or because of Simmons, but because I love you, Nora Adams. I want to build a life with you, wherever that might be." "Yes," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, I'll marry you." 2 days later, they rode into Salida together, accompanied by Martha and Frank Thompson as witnesses. The town's minister, who visited only once a month from a larger settlement, happened to be in residence at the hotel. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church, with only the Thompsons and a few friendly townspeople in attendance. Nora wore her best dress with wildflowers Martha had helped her gather that morning. Ethan, freshly shaved and in his good shirt, looked at her with such tenderness that her lingering doubts melted away. "I, Ethan, take you, Nora, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When Nora repeated the vows, her voice grew stronger with each word. This marriage, unlike the arrangement she had initially agreed to, was a true choice made with her heart fully engaged. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss the bride." Their kiss sealed more than their marriage. It affirmed their partnership against whatever challenges lay ahead. As they emerged from the church, Nora noticed Sheriff Douglas watching from across the street, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood one of Simmons' men, observing the proceedings with obvious interest. "They'll report back," Ethan murmured, noticing her gaze. "Let them," Nora replied, squeezing his hand. "I want Simmons to know we're not intimidated." The Thompsons hosted a small celebration at their ranch that evening. The other members of their protective association attended, raising glasses to the newlyweds and to their continued resistance against Simmons' pressure. "To Ethan and Nora Evans," Frank toasted, "and to standing your ground." Later, as they rode home under a canopy of stars, Nora felt a sense of peace despite the uncertainties that still surrounded them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Their wedding night was everything Nora had once feared and now welcomed: gentle, considerate, and filled with genuine affection that had grown between them over the months since her arrival. Ethan's patience and respect transformed what might have been frightening into something beautiful and affirming. Afterward, lying in his arms, Nora marveled at how far she had come from the terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with bruises hidden beneath her collar. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "That I never expected to feel safe again," she admitted. "Let alone happy." He pulled her closer. "You deserve both, Nora, always have." The next few days passed in relative peace. Whether their marriage had temporarily confused Simmons' strategy or their association's defenses were proving effective, no new incidents occurred. They maintained their vigilance, but also allowed themselves to enjoy their newlywed status, settling into a deeper partnership. Then came news that changed everything: a telegram from Ethan's contact at the Chicago newspaper. Not only had they published the story about Simmons' intimidation tactics, but it had been picked up by several other papers, including one in Washington, D.C. "A Congressional Committee on Territorial Affairs is looking into it," Ethan read from the telegram, his voice rising with excitement. "They've requested the territorial governor investigate immediately." The news spread quickly among the association members. If federal attention was being directed at Simmons' activities, even his political connections might not protect him. Simmons' response came swiftly. That night, shots were fired at the Evans ranch house, shattering windows and forcing Ethan and Nora to take cover on the floor. No one was injured, but the message was clear: Simmons was done with subtlety. "He's desperate," Ethan said grimly as they cleaned up broken glass the next morning, "which makes him more dangerous. Or it could make him vulnerable," Nora suggested. "Desperate men make mistakes." That afternoon, they received unexpected visitors: two smartly dressed men who introduced themselves as agents from the territorial governor's office, sent to investigate reports of intimidation against small ranchers. "We've received some rather concerning news reports," the older agent explained. "The governor is most distressed to learn of these allegations." Though skeptical of the governor's sudden concern, Ethan and Nora welcomed the investigation, providing detailed accounts of each incident. The agents took copious notes and promised to visit all the affected ranchers. "Do you really think anything will come of it?" Nora asked after they left. "Maybe," Ethan replied cautiously. "The governor can't afford to ignore federal attention, even to protect his wife's cousin." That evening, members of the association gathered again to discuss this new development. Opinions were divided on whether the investigation represented genuine help or merely a show to appease outside scrutiny. Either way, we keep our guard up, Frank advised. Simmons won't go down without a fight. How right Frank was became clear the very next day when Nora, alone at the house while Ethan checked cattle in the north pasture, found herself facing Wade Simmons himself on her front porch. He had come without his usual escorts, just himself, well-dressed and smiling coldly as she opened the door with a shotgun in her hands. "Mrs. Evans," he greeted her with mock politeness. "May I come in?" "You may not," Nora replied firmly, the shotgun steady in her grip. "My husband isn't here." "I know," Simmons said. "That's rather the point of my visit. I thought we might have a more reasonable conversation without him." "Whatever you have to say can wait for his return," Nora stated, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Simmons sighed dramatically. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm offering you both a way out, more money than this patch of dirt is worth, enough to start fresh somewhere else." "We're not interested," Nora replied. "Now please leave our property." Simmons' pleasant facade slipped. "You know, I did some checking into your background, Mrs. Evans. Your uncle in Philadelphia, Roland Adams, isn't it? He's been quite concerned about your whereabouts." The mention of her uncle's name sent ice through Nora's veins, but she refused to show fear. "My uncle has no say in my life anymore. I'm a married woman now." "Yes, but there are questions about how you left," Simmons continued smoothly. "Something about missing items of value. Your uncle seems to think you might have taken things that weren't yours." "That's a lie," Nora said firmly, though her throat had gone dry. "I took nothing but my own clothes." "Perhaps," Simmons conceded with a shrug, "but accusations can be troublesome things, especially when backed by influential men. Your uncle is a city councilman, I understand." The threat was clear. Simmons was offering to either protect her from her past or use it against her, depending on her cooperation. "My past holds no power over me anymore," Nora declared, surprising herself with the truth of the words. "And neither do you. Now get off our land before I use this shotgun." Something dangerous flashed in Simmons' eyes, but he merely tipped his hat. "As you wish, Mrs. Evans, but remember I tried to be reasonable." As he mounted his horse and rode away, Nora's hands finally began to shake. She lowered the shotgun and leaned against the doorframe, breathing deeply to calm herself. When Ethan returned an hour later, his face darkened with anger as she related Simmons' visit and threats. "We should have expected this," he said, pacing the kitchen. "He's trying to find pressure points." "He won't find any," Nora assured him. "My uncle can make whatever claims he wants. I'm not afraid of him anymore." Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her with admiration. "You're the bravest person I've ever known, Nora Evans." The use of her married name brought a smile to her face despite the situation. "Not brave," she corrected him. "Just determined. There's a difference." That night they doubled their vigilance, taking turns keeping watch. Around midnight, Ethan spotted movement near the barn, shadowy figures moving with purpose. "Stay here," he whispered to Nora, reaching for his rifle. "No," she replied firmly, already pulling on her boots. "Together, remember?" Outside, they moved quietly toward the barn, staying in the shadows. 3 men were attempting to open the corral gate, preparing to stampede the horses and cattle. Ethan fired a warning shot into the air. "That's far enough." The intruders responded with gunfire of their own, bullets splintering wood near Ethan's position. Nora, circling to the side as they had practiced, fired her shotgun into the air, the sound alone enough to spook the horses in the corral, creating confusion that worked to their advantage. In the chaos that followed, one of the intruders was thrown by a panicked horse while the other 2 retreated, firing wildly as they fled. When silence returned, Ethan and Nora approached the fallen man cautiously. He was alive but injured, clutching his leg where the horse had struck him. "You're on Evans' land," Ethan said coldly, rifle trained on the man. "Who sent you?" "You know damn well who," the man spat. "Simmons pays good money." "For what exactly?" Ethan pressed. The man's pain loosened his tongue. "Scare tactics at first, then more. He wants this land bad, mister. Said to do whatever it takes." Ethan's expression hardened. "Including murder." The man's silence was answer enough. At first light, Ethan rode to town with their prisoner tied securely to his own horse. Sheriff Douglas was reluctant to take the man into custody until Ethan mentioned that the territorial agents would be very interested to hear what the prisoner had to say about Simmons' orders. "Fine," Douglas relented. "I'll lock him up, but don't expect much." "I expect you to do your job," Ethan replied coolly. For once, news of the captured man spread quickly. By noon, the other association members had gathered at the Evans Ranch, along with the agents from the territorial office who had returned to continue their investigation. "This is the evidence we needed," the senior agent declared after interviewing Nora about the night's events. "Attempted destruction of property, assault with deadly weapons, possibly attempted murder. Combined with the pattern of incidents across multiple ranches, it's enough to bring formal charges against whoever is responsible." "Simmons won't go down easily," Frank warned. "He still has powerful friends." "Perhaps," the agent conceded. "But the governor is more concerned about his own position now that Washington is paying attention. He's authorized us to request federal marshals if needed." The promise of official support boosted morale among the ranchers, but Ethan remained cautious. "Simmons is cornered now," he warned Nora that evening. "That makes him most dangerous." How right he was became clear the next morning when they awoke to find their water source, the creek that made the ranch viable, had been dammed and diverted upstream, where it crossed Simmons' property before reaching Ethan's land. "He's cutting off our water," Ethan said grimly as they stood looking at the nearly dry creek bed. "Without it, the cattle can't survive." Nora understood immediately the seriousness of the situation. "Can he do that legally?" "No, water rights are clearly established." "But he's counting on it taking too long to fight through proper channels. By then, our cattle will be dead or will be forced to sell at ruinous prices." The other ranchers in the association faced similar crises. Jim Barton's irrigation ditches had been destroyed. The Thompsons found their access road blocked by felled trees and armed men claiming it crossed Simmons' property, though surveys proved otherwise. "He's making a final push to break us all," Frank declared when they gathered to discuss the escalating situation. "Trying to force us out before the official investigation can affect him." They decided on a bold plan. The association members would ride together to Simmons' ranch, confront him directly about the water diversion, and demand its restoration, with the territorial agents accompanying them to provide official witness. The next morning, 10 ranchers, including Ethan, along with the 2 agents, rode toward Simmons' sprawling ranch headquarters. Nora, despite Ethan's concerns, insisted on joining them. "This affects me as much as you," she argued. "Our future is at stake together." Simmons' ranch was impressive, a large main house surrounded by extensive outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses for his numerous hands. As their group approached, they saw men taking up positions, rifles ready. "State your business," called a foreman from the porch. "We're here to see Simmons about illegal water diversion," Ethan replied firmly. "And we have representatives from the territorial governor with us." After a tense wait, Simmons himself appeared, looking unconcerned despite the large group confronting him. "This is private property," he called. "Whatever grievances you think you have should be addressed through proper channels." "We've tried proper channels," Frank responded. "You've blocked them all. We want the dams removed from the creek and the other obstacles you've placed on our properties cleared immediately." Simmons smiled coldly. "I have no idea what you're talking about." The senior territorial agent stepped forward. "Mr. Simmons, I'm here representing Governor Adams. We have evidence linking you to numerous acts of intimidation against these ranchers. I strongly suggest you cooperate." "Evidence?" Simmons laughed. "From a man caught trespassing who'll say anything to save himself. That won't stand up." "Perhaps not alone," the agent agreed. "But combined with the documentation we've gathered from multiple ranchers, the pattern is clear. And now, we have direct evidence of water rights violations that can be verified immediately." Something flickered in Simmons' expression, the first hint that he recognized his position might not be as secure as he'd believed. "I suggest we inspect the creek together," the agent continued firmly. "If there's no dam as you claim, you have nothing to worry about." Simmons glanced at his armed men, clearly calculating whether direct confrontation was worth the risk, especially with official witnesses present. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. Let's inspect this alleged dam. But only you two officials and Evans. The rest stay here." After a brief discussion, they agreed to Simmons' terms, with the understanding that if the inspection party didn't return within an hour, the others would seek help from the nearest federal authorities. Nora watched with anxiety as Ethan rode away with Simmons and the agents. The tension at the ranch was palpable, with Simmons' hands watching the remaining ranchers warily. An hour passed with excruciating slowness. Then, just as the ranchers were preparing to leave as agreed, riders appeared in the distance, Ethan and the agents returning, with Simmons and his foreman following behind. The group looked grim but unharmed. "What happened?" Nora asked as Ethan reached her. "They saw the dam," Ethan explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Simmons tried to claim it was for flood control, but it was obviously designed to divert the entire creek away from our property. The agents documented everything. Ordered him to remove it immediately or face arrest." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "It worked, Nora. They're sending men to dismantle it today." The territorial agents gathered the ranchers to explain the situation. "Mr. Simmons has agreed to remove all obstructions to water access and property rights immediately," the senior agent announced. "He has also been informed that any further intimidation or property damage will result in his arrest and prosecution." "And you believe him?" Frank asked skeptically. "We don't have to rely on belief," the agent replied. "The governor has authorized a detachment of territorial rangers to remain in the area until the situation is fully resolved. They'll arrive tomorrow." The news was met with cautious optimism. After months of fear and intimidation, the tide seemed to be turning. As they rode home, Ethan and Nora discussed what this might mean for their future. "You think it's really over?" Nora asked. "Not entirely," Ethan admitted. "Simmons still has influence. But with official attention on him now, he can't operate as openly as before. And if enough of us stand together, he can't pick us off individually." That night, for the first time in weeks, they slept soundly, without taking turns to keep watch. The next morning, as promised, water began flowing again in the creek, not at full volume yet, but the dam was clearly being dismantled. 2 days later, a company of territorial rangers arrived in Salida, establishing a temporary headquarters in town. Their commander paid visits to all the ranches that had reported problems, assuring the owners of their protection while investigations continued. Life gradually returned to something resembling normal. Ethan and Nora focused on rebuilding what had been damaged, strengthening their home, and planning for the future. A month after the confrontation at Simmons' ranch, news arrived that changed the landscape. Permanently, Wade Simmons had been indicted by a federal grand jury on multiple charges of intimidation, property destruction, and conspiracy. The evidence provided by the Ranchers Association, combined with testimony from the captured hired hand and documentation from the territorial agents, had proven too substantial to ignore. "He'll fight it," Ethan cautioned when they received the news. "Men like Simmons don't surrender easily." "But he'll be fighting in the courts now," Nora pointed out. "Not on our land." The change was gradual but unmistakable. Sheriff Douglas, sensing which way the wind was blowing, became noticeably more attentive to the smaller ranchers' concerns. Simmons' men kept their distance, and work on the Evans ranch proceeded without interference. By the time winter arrived, bringing snow to the mountains and quieter days on the ranch, Ethan and Nora had settled into a peaceful routine that would have seemed impossible months earlier. Sitting before the fire one evening, Nora worked on mending while Ethan read from a new book they'd ordered from Denver, one of many small luxuries they now allowed themselves. "I was thinking," Nora said, setting aside her sewing, "about expanding the garden next spring. Maybe adding an orchard eventually." Ethan looked up, smiling at the long-term plans. "Apples do well in this climate. Might take a few years to bear fruit, though." "That's all right," she replied. "We have time." She hesitated, then added with a mixture of nervousness and joy, "And I think our family might be expanding before the orchard does." It took a moment for her meaning to register. When it did, Ethan's expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "You're certain?" he asked, moving to kneel beside her chair. Nora nodded, placing his hand gently against her still flat abdomen. "Pretty certain. Martha noticed the signs before I did. She says late spring, probably May." Ethan's eyes filled with emotion as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." In that moment, all the struggles of the past year, the fear, the violence, the uncertainty seemed worth enduring for the peace and joy they had found together. As winter settled over the Colorado mountains, bringing both challenges and beauty, Ethan and Nora Evans prepared for the future with hope. The ranch continued to grow. Their alliance with neighboring ranchers remained strong, and their love deepened with each passing day. When spring arrived, bringing new calves to the herd and green shoots to Nora's expanded garden, it also brought news that Wade Simmons had been convicted on most charges and sentenced to 3 years in a federal prison. His vast holdings were being sold off to cover judgments awarded to the ranchers he had targeted. "Justice sometimes moves slowly," Ethan observed when they received the news, "but it got there eventually." On a perfect day in late May 1879, with wildflowers painting the meadows in brilliant colors, Nora gave birth to their son William Franklin Evans, named for both their fathers. Martha Thompson served as midwife, while Ethan paced anxiously outside until the first cries announced his child's arrival. Standing together at the window of their bedroom, their newborn son cradled in Nora's arms, they watched the sun setting behind the mountains that had become their true home. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked softly, "when you sent for a mail-order bride?" Ethan shook his head, his arm protective around her shoulders. "Never. I hoped for a companion, maybe eventually affection. I never dreamed of finding such complete happiness." Nora thought back to that day almost a year ago when she had stepped off the stagecoach, bruised and terrified, to face an unknown future with a stranger. How far they had both come since then. "You kept your promise," she said, looking up at him with love. "The day I arrived, you told me I would be safe here forever. You made that true." We made it true, Ethan corrected gently. Together. As their son slept peacefully in his mother's arms, Ethan and Nora Evans stood united in the home they had defended, and the life they had built stronger for the challenges they had overcome, and grateful for the love that had transformed them both.